Welcome to my latest Skyrim build, the Captain. This character focuses more on teamwork than on being an unstoppable killing machine. He may not be the strongest guy around, but his squad can decimate anything it comes up against. As always, all the footage shown here is from the legendary difficulty setting, and this build is designed for the same difficulty, but obviously works just fine on the lower difficulties too. I must give credit to the YouTuber Major Slack, as it was his series on Luck's Iron Breast and the Death Squad that helped me to make this build the best it could be. I highly recommend you not only check out that series, but also go through all of his videos, as he creates real walkthroughs for a ton of different games, and is an expert on Skyrim, not only knowing the game inside out, but also proving his knowledge in various videos. Without any more delay, let's get on to the build. The Captain was born and raised in the Imperial City. His family had moved from High Rock before he was born, and he didn't feel any strong ties to the homeland of his people, instead feeling more at home with the Imperials. This strong feeling of kinship will lead to him joining the Imperial Legion, and eventually working his way up to the rank of Captain. This meant that he was in charge of a small garrison of Imperial soldiers, who were originally stationed within the Imperial City, but ended up being transferred into Skyrim, to reside in one of the forts that dots the landscape. The garrison settles into their new home, but it isn't long before the Great War begins, and struggles soon appear within the fort. Being a high elf puts the Captain in a dangerous position. Although not a member of the Thalmor, he is viewed by many to still be an enemy to the Imperials, simply due to his race. He is able to reassure the men under his command that he is loyal to the Emperor, but tension hangs heavy every night, and the Captain knows that it wouldn't take much for things to turn violent. Messengers rarely came to the fort with new orders, but every time they did, there was a clear mix of caution and fear written across their faces as they entered, most likely assuming some kind of trap was in store for them. They were always relieved to find the location truly was still under Imperial control, but the visits reinforced the fears the other soldiers had. It shouldn't have come as a surprise, but one morning, whilst patrolling the battlements, a sword was drawn and thrust towards the Captain. Instead of trying to defend himself, he let the blade pierce his armour, slicing through his skin and causing blood to start seeping from the wound. The soldier whom had stabbed him looked shocked. The man had obviously been expecting his attack to reveal the Captain to secretly be a member of the Aldmeri Dominion, but instead all it had done was meant that he had attacked a fellow soldier. Knowing the thoughts that must be passing through the soldier's mind, the Captain placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and calmly told him that he wasn't the enemy. He then removed the man's sword from his stomach and handed it back to him, making sure to wipe the blood from the tip before dismissing himself and returning to his quarters. Once there, he began to heal himself as best as he could. He was a skilled mage and was able to use magic to stop the bleeding and seal the wound. The scar remained, but he was glad of it. It served as a physical reminder to his men that he was loyal to the Empire over anything else. Thanks to his actions on the battlements, the Captain had a far easier time keeping peace in the fort for the rest of the war. After the White Gold Concordant is signed, tensions alleviate further in the fort. Although nobody is happy about the terms, they are still reassured to know that some semblance of peace has been acquired. The fort runs smoothly for a time, but when the Civil War begins, tensions boil over. Many of the men stationed within the fort are Nords, and are torn between siding with their kinsmen or staying loyal to the Legion. Knowing the struggle they are facing, the Captain tells his men that he will allow any of them to leave without punishment. He does warn them though, that this could lead to them meeting on the battlefield as enemies in the future. Despite this, several of the men leave, and the next time a messenger comes to the fort, it is to summon the Captain back to the Imperial City. For the crime of letting potential Stormcloaks walk free of his fort, he is stripped of his rank and discharged from the Legion. He had been a faithful servant of the Legion and the Emperor for decades, but is now left without purpose. He decides to travel back towards Skyrim. It was his home for so long that it seems right to him to go back there. As he crosses the border, he will be caught up in an ambush, and doesn't fight against the Stormcloaks, fearing that one of the men may have once been under his command. The main skills of this build are Conjuration and Illusion. Conjuration is easily the most important skill of this build, and you'll be sinking a lot of perk points into this skill tree over the course of the game. We will want to focus on both the action arc path and the bound weapon skills in the tree to maximise the effectiveness of this build. As with all of my legendary builds, the perks I have on the character shown in the video will be listed in the description, but the most important perk to get is Twin Souls, which will let you summon 2 Atronachs at the same time. Although Illusion will be used far less than Conjuration, it is still an incredibly helpful part of this build. The key to a squad build is to overwhelm your opponents, and this works best if the numbers are on your side. If you ever find the tables turned against you, then you can use various illusion spells to influence what enemies do. Frenzy spells can be used for creating a distraction, but be careful with these as it can lead to you taking an errant arrow or fireball if you aren't focusing on every enemy. Fear spells are also very handy, as they thin out the enemy to a much more manageable amount, but having your enemies spread out can be quite dangerous once the spell wears off. For me personally, I found calm spells worked the best. Turning enemies peaceful and letting you focus on taking them out one at a time works incredibly well for tougher fights, and stops you having to worry so much about covering every angle. The additional skills of this build are Archery and Restoration. Archery is here for you personally to deal out some decent damage. Although you aren't the main damage dealer of the squad, you don't want to have to stand back and let everyone else have a piece of the action whilst you're just twiddling your thumbs. Being an archer is ideal for a squad build, as it lets you keep your distance from enemies, while still being able to be precise enough to rarely hit your teammates with attacks. I included Restoration in this build primarily so that you can heal down followers. The last thing you want is a member of your team to not be up and fighting, so using Healing Hands is great for any drawn out fights where a follower is having to tank a lot of damage. In addition, it's obviously good for keeping yourself at max health, but also is good for dealing with undead hordes, as you won't be able to use illusion magic on them until your illusion skill is incredibly high. Instead, just use turn undead spells the same way you would use standard fear spells. The standing stone I would recommend for this build would be the Ritual Stone. This will allow you to raise all nearby dead once per day, heavily increasing the size of your army and providing you with a serious edge. I never actually used the power myself, as I found I never particularly needed to whilst playtesting, but if you ever find yourself struggling in a large fight, then this will turn the tide of battle for you. In addition to using the Ritual Stone's power, don't forget about your racial ability of Highball. This is great for rapidly regaining Magika when your supply bottoms out. This build will be requiring a large Magika pool in order to keep casting all the relevant spells, so make sure you focus on this whenever you level up too. The main weapons of this build will be Conjuration Staves and the Bound Bow. Conjuration Staves are absolutely great, letting you summon Atronachs at a huge distance and without depleting your Magika supply. I personally had a staff of Flame, Storm and Frost Atronach, but you only really need to have one in your possession. The Bound Bow is going to be our direct damage weapon. This lets us get involved in fights from a safe distance, with a reasonably powerful weapon that will take down weaker enemies without us having to rely on our squad to do all the work. In addition, once you have upgraded bound weapons in the Conjuration skill tree, this bow will have the Soul Trap effect on it, allowing you to easily fill up soul gems, which in turn can be used to recharge your staff. The armour for this build will be Nightingale Armour, Nightingale Boots, the Nightingale Hood, and the Gauntlets of the Old Gods. Obviously one of these sticks out quite a bit, but there is method in the madness. The Gauntlets of the Old Gods will give an increase to your bow damage, making you more powerful, whereas the Nightingale Gloves would only boost lockpicking and one-handed, which aren't skills we will be worrying about. If you aren't fussed about the extra damage though and prefer the character to look a little nicer, then you can always switch over to the full Nightingale set. That being said, the game seems to not always show the Gauntlets of the Old Gods when you're wearing the Nightingale armour, so occasionally you won't have to sacrifice looks for power. Out of the rest of the set, the Nightingale Hood is the most important piece. The armour and boots give fairly decent bonuses, but nothing that affects us too drastically. The hood on the other hand reduces the cost of our illusion spells, helping us to cast more of them in combat. I chose this particular setup of armour in order to make it so this build doesn't require any crafting whatsoever. This is a legendary difficulty build, which doesn't force you to interact with the crafting table even once if you don't want to. This little mix-up of the two different sets works quite well for this build, and using light armour gives a good balance between mobility and protection, ensuring we are agile, but also won't go down to a single attack. There are two factions I've included for this build. They are the Dawn Guard and the Imperial Legion. The Imperial Legion is here obviously to tie into the backstory. Having previously been a captain for them, he will already have ties to that faction, and formally joining ranks once more may be necessary to restore some level of peace to Skyrim. He will not be pleased at having to fight against the Stormcloaks, but he understands that this must be done for the greater good of the Empire. Joining the Dawnguard is not only good for the purpose of getting a castle for your squad to reside in, but also helps out with the choice for non-human followers. By going far enough down the Dawnguard side of things, you will unlock Huskies and armoured trolls to fight at your side, making it a good idea to side with them for the long haul. The main follower for this build will be Teldrin Sero. He can be recruited from the Retching Neck in Ravenrock, and is the best follower for a squad build, as he summons a Flame Atronach at the start of every combat. This is invaluable, as having him around effectively adds 2 additional members to your fighting force. If you aren't playing the Skyrim Special Edition or don't have a Dragonborn DLC, then you will probably just want to go with whatever follower you personally like most. You will also want a non-human follower at your side. In the video I am using Miko, simply because he's the easiest and cheapest to obtain, but I would personally recommend using an armoured troll purchased at Fort Dawnguard. These are great for tanking damage and keeping powerful enemies occupied. In the interest of time, I didn't end up getting one, but I highly recommend that you do, as it will make fights so much easier, and also just looks awesome having an armoured troll at your side. The key with a squad build is to let your followers and Atronachs do most of the fighting. At the start of combat, deploy your own Atronachs to intercept the enemy, and let the rest of your squad charge forward, while you stay behind and either pepper the enemy with bound arrows, or use your array of illusion spells to manipulate the battlefield. It's important to know the strengths and weaknesses of each member of your team, so keep an eye on them in battle to work out how best to use them. In addition, don't forget to keep them healed up in drawn out fights. The last thing you want is for your Atronachs to go down at the same time you and your followers are out for the count. Thank you all for watching this build through to the very end. Make sure to give it a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you're new around here. I make some of the best builds on YouTube, so if you like this one, then you'll probably enjoy the rest too. If you are looking for something to watch right now, then either click on one of the links in the description or on one of the on-screen video links.